day 3 of the India FOSS week. The last 2 days we had a session on governments and one on education, and today it's going to be about the FOSS in business panel. And and my name is Preeti Govindrajan. I am a researcher at CivicDataLab. And CivicDataLab is a research organization that works at the intersection of data, technology, design, and social science to further the cause of civic engagement in India. So now I'll just take you through the agenda for today. So there'll be a quick set of housekeeping announcements, after which I will walk you through the findings from the State of FOSS in India report, the FOSS in business section. And then there'll be a panel discussion on FOSS in business, moderated by Venkatesh Hariharan. We call him Venki. And then there'll be a quick Q&A. In terms of housekeeping, we are having this meeting on Classmeet. It is a tool given to us by Chiguru Collab, and it's also being streamed live on YouTube. So all of you watching this on YouTube, if you have any questions, any comments, any suggestions, I would urge you all to put it in the comment box over there. We have a couple of CDL members looking at it, and they will send us any comments, questions you have so that the panelists can answer it. I hope that's sufficient. Now we'll move on to the key findings from the State of FOSS in India report. So to begin with, for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, free and open source software, FOSS, is software that is freely licensed to use, copy, study, change, improve, and redistribute. Now, FOSS is an inclusive term, and it covers both free software and open source software. These two describe similar ownership models, but have very different cultures and philosophies. So you can think of free software as a social movement, while open source software is more like a development methodology. They both have the same ends, but different means to reach this end. And now, why do we care about free and open source software? The main reason we care about free and open source software is because the world largely runs on FOSS. I don't think this is very hyperbolic in saying this, but if you are booking tickets on IRCTC, if you are trading stocks on Bombay Stock Exchange, all of these tools are built on top of FOSS. The operating systems inside tiny USBs, when the LEGO detector detected the gravitational waves, when Netflix tells you that you have to watch Queen's Gambit next, all of this is running on FOSS. However, most of the services I've mentioned so far, they consume FOSS to build their service. However, they do not contribute back as much. And because FOSS is so ubiquitous, it becomes very important that we as a nation know how to capitalize it in a responsible, ethical, and efficient manner. And that is actually the reason that we at CivicDataLab also started this report on the free and open source software to document this space in India. So, 1 second. Okay. Yeah. So, So when we started, we spoke to more than 50 people, different parts of the ecosystem, and we categorized the ecosystem into 4 large buckets: the educational institutes and FOSS governments, who we heard from yesterday and day before; the FOSS community, which is an integral part of any FOSS ecosystem, which we'll hear from tomorrow; and FOSS businesses, which we will go into today. So to understand the relationship between FOSS and business, we need to understand the history. Now, please be aware that I cannot go into all the details of history that have ever happened. I'll just pick a few moments. So to begin with, there was only free software, in the sense that the idea that code could be copyrighted did not exist. However, with the coding becoming more popular and more companies coming up, they started figuring out ways to hide the source code from the user. And this eventually led in the 1980s to copyright law being extended to both software code as well as binaries. And actually, as it happens, this also triggered the beginning of the free software movement and the Free Software Foundation. So needless to say, the relationship between FOSS and business has been tenuous at best. In the beginning, large corporations went out of their way to impede the progress of free and open source software. However, a few things have happened in the past which have kind of created the popularity of the FOSS movement, as well as the ubiquitous nature of free and open source software. They are so one was the founding of the Open Source Initiative, which was basically created by Bruce Perens and Eric S. Raymond. And the reason for the Open Source Initiative was to sort of package FOSS in a more business-friendly manner. Eric S. Raymond also coined the term open source, and they also brought in business-friendly licenses and basically spun a more pragmatic approach to the free software movement that was there. The second thing that happened was the existence of the LAMP stack that came about. This is to say that for the first time, the entire stack that was necessary to create, say, a website was available in the open source, in open. So people could use it, people could create websites really quickly and really cheaply, more importantly. And this eventually would lead to the next step, which sort of solidified FOSS's ubiquitousness. And this is the rise of internet businesses. So when we talk about internet businesses, we talk about businesses like Google, Amazon, Facebook. And these businesses mainly ran their business on top of the internet. And most of them used open source stacks for building this. So they had added incentive to make sure that these open source projects that they were using were well maintained, were innovated on, and therefore they also put a lot of resources into building these in a robust manner. And finally, the last thing that sort of seals this popularity of FOSS was the rise of cloud computing. So around I think 2005, when Amazon Web Server was first established, there was this, like suddenly programmers could compute a lot faster and more complex things much quicker. And all of these together, and also cloud computing stacks were largely open source. And also these four things together would end up like leading the tech startup revolution in India. So, and it happened to such a great deal that over the last few years, even the big tech that initially sort of were impeding the progress of free and open source software have made huge 180s and have adopted it and advocated for it and in the last few years. So in India, things have been slightly different. So FOSS has been consumed quite a bit by businesses. However, in terms of contribution back by businesses, it has been not that great. However, largely it was like Indian subsidiaries of large multinational companies that would start FOSS projects of different kinds and contribute back, like Red Hat India, like ThoughtWorks, like IBM. However, in the last 10 years or so, there has been this interesting trend of a large number of FOSS projects and products and creators and businesses coming out of India, many of whom we'll be talking to today in the panel discussion, Hasura, ERT Next, Ashnik. So this is largely about the chronicling of like the FOSS and business timeline. Please note again that this is a really quick summary. It's not comprehensive, and we would urge you to go look at the report for more details. And finally, after we chronicle the timeline, the one thing that we did as a part of the FOSS report was to put up a set of challenges and recommendations for each of these focus areas, each of these key stakeholders we were talking about. And we noted that there were a few common threads that were seen across stakeholders, which we have termed the 4 Cs. They are to build capacity, to consume ethically, to contribute regularly, and to co-create. So in terms of building capacity for FOSS businesses, the main challenge we observed was that there was a limited FOSS understanding around specifically the values of FOSS and the hacker ethic. So while most engineers would agree that showing some sort of open source contribution on your CV or something like that is useful, the deeper understanding of like FOSS values and FOSS ethic is slightly missing, and we recommend FOSS workshops and more advocacy to sort of instill the same. For example, the ICT at Africa initiative that was organized by the Free Software Foundation in Africa, they rigorously made sure that they were training and consulting and also like regional networking specifically for MSMEs in Africa who were interested in working with free and open source software. And again, another example would be like the early days of Red Hat India, when they were rigorously advocating for free and open source software with their evangelizing quite a bit with the 3A model of awareness, acknowledgement, appreciation, and awareness. And I might have gotten that slightly wrong. And after this particular step is done, we move to the second one, which is consume ethically. So under ethical consumption, the main challenge we noticed was the lack of knowledge around the FOSS licenses, business models, and policies among large businesses. And small ones. So there are around more than, I think, 80 FOSS licenses at the moment. So any FOSS creator or any FOSS user has to have intimate knowledge about the kinds of licenses, what they mean, and how they can be used. There are organizations that, of course, support this. SFLC India is one of them. However, there is room for a lot more, especially in India. The third thing that we are looking at is about contribute regularly. So this is one place that we think FOSS businesses actually face, not FOSS businesses, just businesses face a huge challenge in terms of sustained contributions. While most businesses in India consume a lot of free and open source software, there is less contribution back into the ecosystem. This has, of course, a lot of exceptions. For example, ThoughtWorks India has a lot of free and open source projects that they contribute to, have created, and have a community around, and actively work with. While other companies like, for example, TCS and Wipro tend to support FOSS initiatives in the form of like finances, sponsoring conferences, symposiums, etc. However, having like a permissive FOSS policy, which allows young developers that join these companies to contribute to open source projects, would help both the developers as well as the companies. And the last point is to co-create and grow. So we have noticed that there is a disconnect between businesses and the FOSS community, and this needs to be bridged. One of the ways in which this is happening is the FOSS United Foundation, which was created by, I guess, Rishabh Mehta and Kailash Nath from ERP Next and Zerodha. And they actively try to create a community of for FOSS creators and developers to support and financially, as well as with respect to like getting information back and forth and things like that. So all of this is to basically say that the future for FOSS businesses in India is a bright one, and it's kind of happening now. If global trends in businesses are to be believed, like there is going to be a lot of new FOSS businesses coming in India. And how best can we support, how best can we create an ecosystem of support for these creators to thrive in India is the question at hand. And we believe that the creation of something like a National FOSS Alliance is the way to go. This is to say that there needs to be collaboration between all the four stakeholders that we have talked about together towards a shared vision. And each of these stakeholders have a specific role. For example, businesses would play a role in incubating more FOSS projects, creating a marketplace for these FOSS projects, and supporting the talent pool that comes out of the university. And there is a lot more in this report, but I've just given a quick summary of it. I invite comments, suggestions, improvements to the report. So please go ahead and download it and read it. And I think now we will hand this over to Venkatesh Hariharan to begin the panel discussion on FOSS and business. Venki is the India representative for the Open Invention Network. And before this, he was a part of the IDFC Institute as a senior research fellow and created the Data Governance Network, which is a network of think tanks. Venki has been extremely instrumental in the creation and the various reviews of this report. So thank you so much, Venki, and over to you.
Thanks, Preeti. Thank you so much for that summary, and and congratulations on the report. So today we will speak about the state of FOSS in India and how we can grow FOSS businesses in India. And this is across multiple spectrums. Basically, one is how can we grow the domestic market. The other is how can Indian FOSS businesses grow the global opportunity. The third is, what are the kind of legal licensing challenges that we are facing? And the fourth is around, the product and services spectrum. And today we have a very good mix of people to deliberate on these topics because we have Marshal Correia, who heads Red Hat in India. Marshal has worked with HP for about 3 decades and now heads Red Hat in India. So he's seen open source from the perspective of a system integrator and now as somebody who's heading Red Hat in India. We have Sachin Dabir, a former colleague of mine. Sachin and I worked with each other at Red Hat for almost about 7-8 years. And Sachin was the head of enterprise sales, and he later on joined Red Hat in Singapore. And then he started his own services company called Ashnik. And now Ashnik is looking to move from being an open source services company to also becoming an open source product company. So what are the lessons? Why is he doing that journey? I think interesting questions to be answered there. We have Rajoshi Ghosh, who's in the very hot area of data. We see today an explosion of multiple sources of data, and how do you integrate that? How do you combine that together to get a holistic picture? So Rajoshi works on that. Her company is based in Bangalore and Silicon Valley, so she operates across multiple time zones. They recently raised about, collectively they have raised about $35 million. So probably the one FOSS business that has raised such a sizable amount of money in India. And it's good to see FOSS businesses raise venture capital of this size. We also have Rishabh Mehta, a veteran of the FOSS industry in India. Uh, his journey has been very different from that of Rajoshi because I think for many years he bootstrapped ERP Next. So Rushabh is the CEO of a company called Frappe.io, which is famous for the product ERP Next. And ERP is a really mission critical product. So I'm curious to learn from Rishabh how he built such a mission critical product out of India and how he's taken it global. Uh, ERP Next and Frappe also recently raised about 10 crores from Zerodha. So we have a good mix of people who can share what is happening in the open source ecosystem in India. So my request would be to the panelists to keep the answers very crisp and short, because what we'll try to do is cover a little bit of ground about what's happening in India, how Indian companies can go global, and then leave some room for about 10-15 minutes of question and answer. And I'll start with you, Marshall, because you've seen open source now from the perspective of a system integrator that worked with Red Hat. I think some of the largest Red Hat projects like the e-codes, etc., were implemented by HP, and now you are inside the belly of the beast, so to speak. So how do you see the journey, and do you see do you feel that Red Hat has tapped the maximum potential of open source businesses in India, or you still see a lot of room to grow?
So first of all, Venki, I would like to thank you for getting us together, and thanks for the opportunity. And the report from CivicDataLab was fairly comprehensive. So I would like to congratulate them for such a comprehensive report. Now, looking at, where India is positioned from an IT map, everyone knows that we figure very prominently. So why not in FOSS? And that is very critical. That's why I like this initiative. Answering your specific question, I have been in the industry for over 3.5 decades. Have seen right from various large mega projects across verticals: banking, telco, government, manufacturing. The good part is India did not have legacy, so to say, right? So not many mainframes and stuff like that, and the penetration was fairly low. And typically, especially when we conceived projects in government, many of the renowned professors were involved in consulting. So in that sense, there was a strong foundation and support for open source. So in my opinion, we have come up a long way. As SI, we always had, there are 2 or 3 areas where we were looking at. One is, the compliance of solution to the business requirement. Second is total cost of ownership. And third is, ability to support the project in a long term. So having a long roadmap, security, scalability, those were very important part of, what we had to deliver. So as I come and look at Red Hat, and I think there are amazing amount of opportunity. I wouldn't say, there are no opportunities. I think more so with what happened during COVID crisis. No matter where you are in your journey, in business journey, most of the businesses are under pressure. They have to innovate new business models. They have to have business processes to support those innovative models, for which you need technology. And one thing I can tell for sure, that any innovation or next innovation is going to come from open source. We have seen across. So in our daily life, we consume so much of open source, right? You go to a browser, you use Android phone, you do any data analytics, anything that you do, it's open source. So, Venki, I would say there are tremendous opportunities.
So just to put some numbers around this, so have you seen, the numbers go up because of COVID, or have you seen the Red Hat's sales numbers in India? have you seen it being, did it come down because of COVID or did it go up? Just
So,
curiosity.
so I would say in general, the digital transformation or digital leadership or whatever acronym you use, I'll keep it simple. Using technology in all part of your businesses to achieve your objectives. I don't want to use some big jargons, right? And I think that part of the initiative, what was planned for, say, 3 years, some of it got delivered so rapidly so that it got accelerated. I think our CIO friends and our CTOs and architects were all in a rapid manner. What they were trying to knock the door got accelerated. So the direct answer is yes, it got accelerated.
Yeah, the joke that was going around on WhatsApp was that the greatest accelerator of digital transformation has been COVID. So
yeah, I mean, it's not a. Yeah, I mean, obviously, COVID is a huge challenge, and it's not something that But as a side kind of a thing of it, digital technology adoption got accelerated. Be it in entertainment, be it in education, be it in e-commerce, be in unified payments, everything. I think the day starts and ends with it.
okay. Thanks, Marshal. We'll come back to you in some time, but
Sure.
I want to go to Sachin because Sachin has been, again, of course, like I mentioned, he's seen the growth of the open source industry from the very early days. And Sachin, I think you were involved with some of the largest breakthroughs in India when it came to open source implementation in India. I think particularly LIC, which I think at one point in time was one of the largest implementations, 2,800 branches of LIC going open source, which was at that time a tremendous accomplishment. And so how do you see the journey of open source in India? You also, as a company, you sell across geographies. So what is your observation of how the Indian market is evolving? And I also want you to speak a little bit about why, from being a pure play services company, you are also now looking to move to building open source products.
Okay, great. First of all, thanks for bringing everybody together. And as Marshal said, this report is a good work, definitely. A lot of efforts have been putting this FOSS report together. Gives a lot of insights, what is happening in India, what is the state. So congratulations to the team that has put together this report. You have asked me a lot of questions, Venki, right from how the open source was there in 2001.
But you don't have, a lot of time, few minutes.
Exactly. And you qualified that in the beginning itself. So I would simply say, look, it's been a fantastic journey, what we have seen from 2001 onward. And when Priti was talking about AAA model, I was all smiling. That's what we implemented, awareness, appreciation, and adoption model. And we still use that as a framework for many of the open source technologies. It is very important when we bring that to the market. Where we see, so fast forward, we started with awareness way back in 2001. I think by 2009, 2010, there was a lot of adoption already happened, right? And actually, in my mind, in 2009, when I started the business, was the fact that Linux is done. I mean, that means there is enough awareness, enough appreciation, and for adoption purpose, there are enough number of, or there were enough number of proof points. LICs and a lot of banks, NIC, huge was there. What we see today is a scale out. And from here onward, even more scale out, rapid scale out. That's where I see open source is playing huge role. There is another important role where open source is playing is innovation, though it is very oftenly used word. But I will give you just one incident, one story from a customer. I heard from a customer where it has to be used, and this story is not from India, and that is the distinction I want to bring about as to state of, when we think about state of open source in India. So this is when I was talking to a CIO of a bank in Indonesia, and fairly conservative bank, we are all familiar with that kind of environment, decided to go very big on open source. And like everybody, every bank wants to say, I asked him, so are you thinking like a technology company? And he said, yeah, of course. I said, everybody wants to do that. So what are you doing differently? And what role open source plays in your bank? So he gave me a very, very interesting, insightful answer. And this is something that all our customers should think about in India is if we have to think about ourselves like a technology company, we have to also think that we have to hire and attract good talent. And where is all the good talent working today? They are working on open source. And that is why we got to be using open source technologies. This is a thinking at the CIO level, at the I'm sure at the senior level. This is one thing I feel that in India this is not being used effectively. That open source for building work culture, building, attracting talent. And one of the reasons that I see could be that we have adopted open source in a way, because when open source came up, it was associated a lot with services and things like that. And in India, we already had the services companies culture, IT services companies culture. And that is why that distinction as to what you can do with open source in terms of building people, building talent, and creating that differentiation, that is something lacking. And that is why what we see today is a huge adoption, huge scale out of open source in the businesses. Yet, as the report points out, we are not able to create enough companies who are being built, technology companies built on or using open source technology. That's
Yeah,
how
I think one of the challenges that we found while writing the report was, how do you build companies that not just use open source at a very tactical level, but also contribute back to it and think of open source from a more strategic perspective. And that's an open question that we will have to address over the next few years. So thanks, Sachin, for that. Let me move on to Rajoshi. And Rajoshi, you are in a one of the hottest areas. And if I look at the evolution of open source in the initial days, open source software was very, open source was in a sense a replacement for proprietary software. So Linux was a replacement for Unix and Microsoft. But then I think the power of collaborative innovation kicked up and it got turbocharged because of the internet. So you're in kind of the open source 2.0 space where now it's actually the power of collaborative innovation has gone so fast that in your kind of area there is no proprietary competitor at all, to some extent. So how do you see the evolution of this, and what are the lessons in it? You are, in some ways, it's very interesting to see. I mean, I've been in open source for 2 decades, and this is the first time that I'm seeing a company raise the kind of capital that you have done, about $35 million. So what are the lessons in that for other entrepreneurs who are building open source businesses? Over to you.
Thanks, Venki. Yeah, I think the way that I think about this is that these are kind of 2 separate questions from the perspective of I'm speaking to, say, a person who wants to start a business, right? So if you want to build a product or start a business, and should that product be open source? These don't necessarily need to be a related sort of topic. You probably are not going to wake up and say, I want to start an open source business, right? So it's more like, what is the problem that you want to solve? And what is the product that you want to build to solve that problem? And then, is open source the right strategy for you? Is it the right approach for you? So that's kind of the question as to when do you pick open source, and should open source be a part of your strategy? When should it be part of your strategy? So I think that's kind of that's sort of the first part. And the second part is then when you start looking at raising money, if you've decided to raise money, And I'm really happy that Rishabh's also here. So, we sort of see both sides of, bootstrap business as well, because, there's no one way of doing it. But if you decide to go down the VC funded business route, then essentially, VCs are going to fund a product or a business that they see bringing creating disproportionate value and sort of having that trajectory. So again, open source is not, because open source businesses have seen success, that is something that they're looking at, but it's not necessarily directly correlated. So again, going back to the first point of, once you decide what is the problem, what are you going to build, and then you say, yes, open source strategy is a part of that. And then you try to kind of figure out where is it that you want to add value? What is the kind of value you're adding? And that then becomes the part that VCs start looking at. So one way of looking at it is, when you sort of start off, you're looking at the project market fit, and then you kind of really start focusing on the product market fit, right? If it's like open source, and then how do you kind of monetize it? So
just a quick so at what point did you decide that you wanted to take the open source route rather than the proprietary route? And it's obviously worked out very well for you, because you recently crossed 100 million downloads, which is, I think, a tremendous achievement. I can't think of any company based out of India that has created a product that has got that level of downloads. So at what point did you decide that open source is the right strategy to adopt?
So it's been a long journey for us. We started off sort of wanting to solve, again, the problem that we were looking at, the larger space that we were looking at, is how do you make application development faster? How do you increase productivity when people are building large scale applications, any kind of application? And the first product we built was actually closed source. And this was, we in fact had a services company back then. We were building it out of there. We were bootstrapping. And we built this product, which our team was super productive with. They were shipping out like complex applications, like on, say, a Kubernetes platform really quickly. And so that was closed source, and that was something we did, and we were very successful as a services company in sort of reaching the goal that we set for ourselves. Then when we wanted to kind of build a product company out of this, and we kind of took this platform that we had to market, we got some good initial feedback, and we sort of stuck with it for a while. And there's a lot of lessons in there, which we can come to perhaps if we have time to later. But what we realized then is, what we had built was, there were too many opinions in this large platform, and as a young startup, if you really wanted to add business value to you couldn't sort of bet your success entirely on also other startups. So we were building an application development framework that could only be used by people starting up, as in they have to be new applications, because it was so opinionated. Then you're not going to add value. So then we kind of moved into what we do today, which is in the infrastructure space. It's in the data access infrastructure space. And I think that's kind of when we decided to open source the product. So we took out a portion of the platform that was actually solving for this data access, which we realized was the largest big bottleneck, and where we were adding the most amount of value. And once we decided that, we realized that open source was the way forward, because infrastructure software and open source have kind of become, it's not a debate anymore. That's how people are adopting software if you're in the infrastructure space. And hence, open source made sense for us. So that's kind of the way that we started with the problem, we sort of took it to the market, learned our lessons, pivoted sort of not the product as well as how we were approaching the market. And then open source became part of that strategy for us.
Thanks, Rajoshi. I think very interesting journey, and I think there will be a lot of entrepreneurs who would, want to kind of do a deeper dive, and maybe we can have a separate session on that. But Rishabh, coming to you, Rajoshi mentioned that at the infrastructure layer, going open source made a lot of sense. You built a mission critical application like ERP, but that's an application. So you could have chosen to keep it proprietary? Why did you choose to make it open source? And you also are very interesting to me because I am a big fan of bootstrapped startups. So you bootstrapped it for such a long time, and we have been in Red Hat, for example, when Sachin and I were there in Red Hat, getting anybody to put their infrastructure on open source was a really long, hard slog. We started with edge of the network, then we moved to the heart of the network by doing multiple POCs over and over again. So it must have been a really tough but I want to hear it in your own words.
Yeah, so my journey was like really weird because I'm a hobbyist programmer to start with, right? So I learned all my programming in the 90s on MS DOS and Visual Basic, Visual Studio, and then I discovered Python one day and I realized, wow, this is as good as .NET, right? It has everything you need and it's free. And at that point, it struck to me that in future, if you want to write software that's going to last, it has to be open source. So rather than an ideological position or distribution, I mean, those things came much later. But the initial push towards open source was that I mean, this model just is better, right, by definition. And and then I was basically I created the ERP system for my own use first, right? And that was my family business. I started in 2005 actually writing this system, and I pushed it out in 2009 on Google Code. And at that time I had no idea, right? What is open source, what is community, what's a contribution, nothing, no idea. Community, mailing lists, everything was like completely foreign. And then it just happened that from just because you are online and somebody discovers you and somebody gives you a tip that hey, put it on GitHub, it's cooler. And so we moved from Google Code to GitHub, and then suddenly it has a social element that the number of stars that goes along, and the ability to contribute also through a pull request and all, right? So everything came very incrementally for us in that sense. And in terms of bootstrap, I mean, I would have taken money, to be very honest, but it's just that, and I've talked to like almost every every venture fund, and it's and maybe because I come across as too much from the tech side of things, people wouldn't see that we would be able to make a large business out of it, right? So that was the journey. It's been very incremental. One of the other counterintuitive things we did was we didn't do services very early on, because like you said, right, it's very hard, and we started selling in India. So I distinctly remember the turning point when I was invited for a meeting and I was kept waiting for 2 hours, and I decided I'm never going to do this. So so at that point I decided it's going to be SaaS. It wasn't even called SaaS. So our hosted version started in 2010. And I said it's going to be like this. This is the price. You go online, you sign up, and you use it. That's it. You're not going to go for meetings. I'm not going to sit outside your office. And then people used to give you so much gyan, right? In India, if you have sold ever, I mean, you said like POCs and everything, right? They just keep on giving you gyan and gyan and gyan, but no business end of the day. And even the small business, we started as a services thing like way early on. And sometimes the worst thing is like at the time of payment, they will want couple of more features, right? I mean, that's so all in all, we were pushed into the direction by School of Hard Knocks is what I can say. Yeah.
So Rishabh, thanks so much for that candid. So what I hear from you is that open source, in a way, it has kind of helped you because it enables people to download, try out the software, and it cuts down the the pain point of selling the product to the end users. But how did you kind of reach this point where now you have companies like Zerodha literally kind of day in and day out using it on a intensely mission critical basis?
It's been very incremental. Like I said, it's 11 years now. So it's every day you make one one small improvement, and that's been the journey. I think there were a few things we did right. I stumbled upon semantic web very early, and I realized this whole metadata modeling concept, and we used that for the framework that we built, and that turned out to be a really good decision, and we stuck to it. So and and as rapid application tools and low code tools are getting very popular, I think this is where we started in 2009, because an ERP has so many business objects you are dealing with, right? And having this kind of platform really helped. So some early technical decisions were turned out to be good, I think, in a way.
So I see that we are at the 5:44 mark. So what I'm going to do is, I have a bunch of follow-up questions, but we'll come to that if we have time. But there are a few questions from the audience. Anshuman Sarkar says, +1 to Rajoshi. I see more success in platforms, infrastructure consulting. However, in OSS business products, it's a major challenge. Sustainability, community are major issues. So this is, I guess, Rajoshi and Rishabh could take this question. How do you balance the needs of the community with the needs of the building the business? If you look at, say, open core kind of models, then how do you kind of? I mean, if I'm a community participant, then why should I be a part of that? Maybe Rajoshi, you could start with that.
Sure. I think for us, sort of, to Anshuman, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think building a community is a really big part of being in this sort of like an open source business model, and so I think from the perspective of keeping the community involved, like the way we structure it, we have a large part of our team that's continuously working on the open source product, and you can essentially run, and we have lots and lots of mission critical applications running on the open source product. You're just putting a lot of people in your team to kind of work on all of the peripheral things when you're running this in production, and those are the things that we have productized as part of our open core offering. So but to run Hasura in production, you can actually do it with the open source product, and I think that's something that's sort of like the product decision that's been neat, and it's so far worked out for us. So from the perspective of like addressing, we're on GitHub, there's issues coming in, the community is very involved, and we have a portion of the team that's continuously, I mean, every time we plan our product sprints, we're looking at that, we're addressing, issues that are coming up with the community. So you cannot not keep your community at this, as a focus area if you are sort of running an open source business. So that is definitely a part of it. Yeah.
Have you ever got pushback from somebody in the community saying that why are you keeping this open source, open core? This is unfair to the community, because I think one of the interesting challenges of running an open source business is the need for balancing the needs of the community vis-a-vis the business, and It's becoming tougher and tougher.
Yeah. So I think we haven't actually run into that problem yet, and I think that's again because you can. Hasura and sort of taking Hasura and sort of adding your own tooling to it is fairly is something you can do yourself, and that's something that and we released our commercial product about, I think I would say, a year and a half after we launched the open source product, and by then a lot of people were already in production. But what we see is the kind of people who use our product are already in the category of people who value developer productivity in a way that the core philosophy of the product is, work on business logic, work on things that are closest to your customer, right? Let us take care of the rest. And we've taken a lot of product decisions to make sure that, it's not a black box, it's open source. You can kind of see what's going on. And so at the end of the day, the open core aspects of it are also, things that sort of just do that. Like, you can do all of this yourself, but you've already bought into the philosophy that you'd rather do something better with your time. And so we've seen that transition, and, the cloud starts off with a, low price point, or you can host it yourself. So we've not really come across that yet. And and that's because of the
Rajoshi, I think we are losing your audio. What I'll do is I'll quickly go to the rest of the panel. I think one question that's being asked is with increased attention being paid to privacy and data collection, do you think this plays any part in accelerating the adoption of open source? Rishabh, Marshal, have you seen that trend in the recent times? Basically, the trend, the push for privacy kind of pushing more people towards adopting open source software.
Yeah, Signal is an example, right? People have put, and more than privacy, it is the unilateral decisions of the platforms that we use, right? I mean, taking off Donald Trump of Twitter, right? While you may question whether, I mean, the timing was definitely questionable, right? If they wanted to pull off Donald Trump, they should have done it like 3 years ago, right? So, and it's not uniformly implemented either. So these kind of unilateral decision making on third-party platforms is definitely an issue. And another example I keep bringing up was that if Google was using Windows, right, for running their search, Microsoft would have realized, here, why is Google buying, setting up so many servers, right? And they would have smelled something. And today, you having an infrastructure on Amazon, and Amazon seeing, that your business is seeing increased growth. They may not know what you are doing, but they know you are growing very fast. And and a company like Amazon has no boundaries, right? So end of the day, it's privacy in terms of having more control over your infra. I would say is more important. Control is a bigger trigger than privacy.
I would just add one point here, Venki, to this question. See, this is one of the core attraction for open source software, that I know what this software does, and that is why I can trust or I cannot trust. And so that has been always the core of it. Today, people are realizing this importance, because more and more examples of the software coming to the fore, especially when we are using applications, and that is coming up in even the government applications, government opening up data and things like that. So I get to see really what, let's say, for example, Signal says that this is the policy that I follow, but I can see the source code and I can verify it, versus somebody says, yes, runs a first page ad and says your data is still secure. How do I know, right? How do I trust you? So just only when you have it open source that I can examine it. And that's the core of open source that everybody should follow. That if you really care about privacy, if you really care about giving assurance to your customers, make it open source.
So when I compare with Sachin, only word I'll add to it is it gives freedom, right? So that's a big thing.
Yeah, actually, I think when we started, I started my journey with open source way back in '99 when we started localizing Linux to Indian languages. And if we wanted to localize, say, Microsoft, we would have had to, spend money on a plane ticket to Redmond, and Microsoft would have said, "Who are you?" And so it was a very different. I think it was a very liberating experience to be able to take the source code, and today Linux is available in some 17 Indian languages, because we could just take it and start translating it. And I think Red Hat Pune Center also had hired many of the localization folks from across India and had a fairly large team at one point in time. So we have another 8 minutes to go. What I would like is all four of you to take a quick 2 minutes and share what do you see as the growth opportunities for free and open source software in India. And Marshal, request you to go first.
Yeah, so basically one of the things that has happened is at the core in many mission critical platforms, Linux is being used. Take stock exchanges, take core banking, take core policy administration, across even the e-governance platforms use Linux. So I think things have moved beyond that. Now, people are obviously opting to cloud, but they don't want a lock-in when you move to cloud. First of all, hybrid cloud is the norm. So you will be on premises, public cloud, private cloud, virtual private, whatever you call it. But you want to keep your data application when you want to move seamlessly. And that is where it is now moving to kind of Kubernetes, right? Beyond that, it also moving to application development frameworks and tooling. So, I mean, at the heart of it is developer productivity. How do you make their life easier, right? So that becomes next. And to add to all that is automation. So, and then open APIs, etc. So I think there are tremendous opportunity. The challenge, I believe, is we are largely consuming and we are not giving back as much, and that effort needs to be boosted. From Red Hat perspective, we are trying to do a lot of things, working with academia, providing internship, providing platform for hosting this. We have many full-time associates who work on the community.
Did we lose Marshal?
See more products coming out of India.
No. Thanks, Marshal. Sachin, your summary, and again, you moving from services to product. Is it because of the heartburn that Rushabh had described? Is it because of similar issues, or what's your reason for doing that?
So these two questions quickly I will address. In first case, I didn't address our journey from services to developing products. See, services, actually we took a very different approach towards services. That knowing very well that it is very difficult to get paid for services in India, and having set up the whole Red Hat business, we knew that, look, unless the products and technologies are being used in business critical environment, nobody is ready to pay you. Correct. So we took upon ourselves to as a mission to make the open source technologies, the products that we brought to market, some of the technologies, make it business critical. That was one important thing. And we always led with consulting, very high, good consulting. Without that, there is no service. And we have seen very good returns, very good results. Today, we are running, operating actually very business critical applications for large enterprises. You would be also surprised to know, I wouldn't take the name of the company, but one of the global SIs based out of India, we are providing high-end consulting and services to them to run some of the open source technologies. Yeah, and that was the result only because we took a decision to focus on very high-end consulting, and that's how we build the skills. We didn't build the scale; we build the skills. That's what we focused on. No. That was first part. And the second part, how do I see the growth in India and going forward? What needs to be done? See, the open source adoption is very, very well, both in government, commercials, in academics. It's pretty large. What has not happened is making it a strategic choice. None of our businesses are talking about open source technologies as the strategic choice for running their businesses or for attracting talent, as I said. So that movement has to come now. Otherwise, it remains at the lower end of the pyramid, that you are using open source technologies or you are getting jobs for open source is not such a big thing yet. Whereas so much, such a big talent. So organizations have to make it more respectable. If I use it, it is already there. I mean, I'm saying from a strategic point of view, that's the key thing that needs to be done.
Thanks so much, Sachin. Rajoshi, your quick summary, and also from the pure curiosity perspective, what percentage of your Hasura's business comes from India?
A very, very small percentage, but we do have a few users. Like I think some teams at Swiggy, for instance, use Hasura, and there are a couple of other ones Swiggy we can name because they've come and spoken about it at our conference, but very small. Yeah, I think what I'd like to talk about in sort of the growth, and I think I saw one of the questions come in as well about like the VC, sort of the VC industry not really supporting open source businesses. I think this is changing. When we raised money for our seed round from India in 2017, like we spoke to every single VC, and we went into most meetings where we had to explain to them what developer tools are. right? And I think since then things have changed, and it's also because it's not to sort of throw shade on the VC industry at all. It's because what is the ecosystem, right? And what are the successes that people have seen? So I think just having developer tooling businesses that are coming out of India. And right now, like, our seed investors, Nexus and Stripe, they've been investing continuously with developer tooling, and a portion of that is in open source software. Seeing the success that they're seeing today, almost every major VC in India is looking to figure out how they can start investing in open source. And I would like to think of that as also a growth opportunity, because I think more support there is in the ecosystem, there is going to be more businesses that come out of it, and that just generally raises the awareness. So so I would like to answer your question in terms of growth. I would say for all of the folks who are there, who are looking at building businesses where open source is a big part of it, it's a good time to sort of start it. And it's also the great thing is it's very meritocratic in a way, because it's global, right? So I think to really use that aspect of being a part of a global community, and then slowly that kind of like also builds up builds up India's contribution to it. And this is in addition to what everyone's saying, which is like a different perspective that I thought I'd offer.
So I'm really happy to see that something that's built out of India is seeing so much of traction globally. The other success story that we see out of India is the Julia programming language, which is used by the Federal Aviation Administration. So I see these as green shoots of India contributing back to the global open source community. Some 15 years ago, I was talking to a professor of an academic institution and talking about the same issue. Why don't Indians contribute back to the community? Currently, India, I think, is number 3 in GitHub in terms of usage of open source. So we hope that companies like you are the trendsetters in us giving back. 15 years ago, this professor told me India is a nation of downloaders, and that was such a one sentence that killed it all. So I think since then, this whole thing of India contributing back has been something that I think we still need to crack it, and there's a lot more to be done. But Rishabh, I will give you the last word, and So how do you see? And again, the same question as Rajoshi. What percentage of your business comes from India? What percentage is global?
So we have close to 25% business coming from India, because we have been primarily an India-based organization, and there is some aspect of sale also involved in a B2B kind of a product. We are not directly selling to developers. I think one realization which, even looking at the global trends about open source and what we have learned, and especially from the sustainability perspective, is that we have to know what the market is. One of the early mistakes we made, so there are two kinds of people, right? There are people who are going to use it for free, and they have AWS and DigitalOcean and so many tools that are available at a very low cost, and right, they can just get a Docker and install it, and they are on their own. So very important to realize that you can't sustain if you're focusing on that market. And you have to really, basically for us, it is the people who are paying for NetSuite or SAP or Salesforce are our customers, and not the people who are going to use it for free. Like a company like ours, Frappe, which we would have used ERPNext for free, right? We are not our own customers. We would have never paid. Like, we don't pay for Python, we don't pay for MySQL, we don't pay for anything we use, right? And we use CentOS, we don't even use Red Hat Linux. So, and we learn. So it's really important to understand that the market is really in the mid and the established businesses. And that's an interesting observation I wanted to add from a sustainability perspective.
No. So thank you, everybody. I think it's been a very fruitful discussion. I think one of the key things that I hear from all of you is that we need to do a lot more from moving open source usage from a very tactical perspective to a more strategic perspective. The other thing I heard is that we need to do more to get Indians to contribute back to the global open source community. I think that will require more of a sustained kind of an effort, and hopefully organizations like FOSS Foundation, FOSS United Foundation, and others can, take the lead. I think in my conversations with people in the IT industry in India, there seems to be now, support for organizations that will take this forward in a very dedicated fashion. And I think after, being part of the study, my sense is that if industry, academia, government, and the community come together, it is not 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is going to be 4, but probably 44. So the compounding effect of all these different communities working in harmony with each other can be substantially greater. So I hope to be in touch. We hope to be in touch with all of you, to grow the open source community in India. And I'll hand over the floor to Preeti for the concluding words.
Thanks, Venki. And this was wonderful, everybody. Thank you so much for actively engaging in this conversation. There was also a lot of conversation going on in YouTube comments largely. I hope you can see it at some point. But thank you. And I just wanted to inform everybody that tomorrow is going to be the last day of the India FOSS week, and we'll have the FOSS and Communities panel happening. I hope all of you can join us. All of you on YouTube, all of you here can join us. We'll have Ramya Raghupati from Hot OSM, Viral Shah from Julia Computing, Udbhav from Mozilla, and Govind from Mossip, and Cherry Matthews will be moderating this panel. So we look forward to having everyone there. Thank you.